What is up, YouTube? It's Squids. It's been a minute. This is a video that I've been planning to make for a while, and the things need to line up perfectly, and they just so did today. So, without further ado, I am very excited to get into this episode, and let's just dig into it, So, the first thing is, I'd say about 2-3 months ago, when I seen the release for the new Neon Genesis Evangelion box set, I was pumped because there hasn't been a US release in almost 11 years, first of all. Second of all, Blu-ray is the first Blu-ray release ever. The other releases in like the mid 2000s, late 2010s, or early 2010s, my bad, were like DVD holiday specials, nothing too crazy. So when I seen that this was coming out, I was very excited. Just got in the mail today. So without further ado, let's go with the box first, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the video where I review the whole series as a whole, what I think of it, and why you should watch it. So, here we go. Right now I've got this whole thing unpacked because I'm so excited to get it in the mail. So it comes in this nice chipboard. Neon Genesis Evangelion. Love the black on red. First glance at this thing. Even in the back it has the nerve, and it says God's in his heaven, all rights with the world, which is really cool. I only got it with, I want to say, maybe one tiny chip. So pretty damn good condition. It comes with some art cards, this nice little fancy box container. I really need to get a ring light. That's for certain. But got this nice Shinji and Rei. Honestly, these are very classy. You don't got much gloss. You got that old-esque, I'd say, 90s, early 2000s-ish feel to them. And I really like that. It adds to the vibe of the show, obviously. Being filmed in 96 would definitely get you that vibe. Let me put those back here. If I can get it back in there. So those are back in there. You got this nice art book, which I haven't really super looked through yet, but it's your disc contents, bonus materials like backgrounds between the episodes and development. From what I could tell, just your Evangelions, creatures, etc., etc. There's those. And of course, with any, limited release, you get the actual back stick advertisements, which, that's pretty normal. Then you got your 3 little subs here. So you got your additional content, which honestly I will have to watch through and go through that and see what that's all about. But we're talking like, I want to say it's quite a few hours. It's got the end of Evangelion on it, the video format version. And then you've got, obviously, the series and the movies in the volume 1. And then volume 2, which is, besides the fact that I collect, the main reason I ended up getting the box set was you get the series and movies with the classic dub and sub, which is what it's about, because we're going to get into that here. But the one thing that I ended up not being too happy about when I did see that they were re-releasing it was the fact that Fly Me to the Moon was no longer going to be a part of the outro. Now, this is going to be mostly, I would say, for my actual review of the series here, but I will, that's kind of a disclaimer that if you're looking forward to having that nice outro that everybody comes to see, and it's just a classic in the anime community. Sad to say it, but you're gonna want to watch a pirated version, which is something I never say. But when push comes to shove, sadly, sometimes you have to do something you don't want to do, and in this instance, it happens to be piracy, which I do not approve of. But now you know. So yeah, overall with the box set and everything, I'd say it's a pretty good release. I have seen some better ones, but the fact that I can actually watch this on Blu-ray now and be pretty damn content makes me very happy. So out of 10, I'll give this box set about a 7.5. Was it worth the wait? I think so. Granted, am I kind of really sad and slightly pissed off that there is absolutely no flying to the moon on this release? Yeah, I am. But you know what? That's not going to stop me from rewatching all these on Blu-ray and be a happy camper about it. So without that out of the way, let's get into the real in-depth review of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Alright, so here's where we're going to get into the spoilers and the description of the show and my personal beliefs and everything that goes with it, because a lot of people do get extremely confused and I want to say drop out, but they don't give it a finish because of the last 2 episodes of the series. So, the story starts off with your main character Shinji. He is a teenage boy, 15, 16, who, I guess, right off the bat, you can kind of tell he's not the type of person that's going to come up to you and say, hey, how's it going? Very shy, very quaint. Then you've got Rei, who is this other girl that also ends up being able to flight the Evangelions. And Shinji appears in town. He has the one and only Misato come pick him up, who ends up working for his dad. And they get to the building, and within like 10 seconds before he can even get settled in, there is an angel, which are the creatures that end up coming to attack civilization, which this takes place in Japan, but there is a base in the US and I want to say Germany, because that is where Asuka comes from. So got that going on, and once this happens, as he gets there and he runs into his dad, Gendo, one of the two, and essentially this is the first time he's seen his dad in a very long time, years in fact, and he wants him to pilot the Evangelion, and he refuses with it first, so they call Rei up to come in and pilot it, which you can tell she's already just gone through the shitter in the ringer, because she is in a stretcher coming through the yard, and like he's like, I can't let her go in there, there's no way in hell she can go in there. So he gets in there, and it's kind of like one of those things where their DNA and everything has to sync up with the Evangelion so they can actually pilot it in the first place. So we got that going on. Rei, which we'll get to in a little bit, is a special case, I suppose. But other than that, for the most part, you have to be fit for Evangelion to be able to pilot it. So Shinji goes in, he does this thing, and he essentially, within, I'd say even a minute, gets rocked. And it blacks out, and he wakes up in the hospital wing of the Nerve building, which is the company that his dad is running at this point in time to destroy all the angels with the Evangelions. At this point, we don't know, but we're getting a little further ahead. And once he blacked out, the Evangelion actually took over and destroyed that angel completely. So that happens. And then we get a little further along, and we learn a little bit about Rei, not a super ton. We get a little character development of Shinji, not much, kind of figure out what he's all about, his daddy issues. We get introduced to Ahsoka, and you find out she's a hothead, very hot-headed woman, and the fact that she's even able to pilot one is just insane. But with her backstory, we'll get into the backstories now. We're kind of going everywhere, but in the most part, we're kind of sticking to the plot. So her backstory essentially is, when she was a kid, her mother ended up committing suicide in front of her, and it scarred her for life. She swore off to be independent, never to rely on anybody, and essentially shows a lot in her character, because once she realizes further down the line that she actually has to rely on people, she mentally crashes, and it turns out really bad. Shinji, we find out later, obviously has daddy issues, and along those lines as well, you find out that when he was like 4 or 5, his mother ended up dying in a research project for Nerve. Now, dad causes a lot of his problems in life. Like, that's when things just start not working for him. He has trust issues, and then you've got Rei, your other big main character, and she is one of those people that's so mysterious, and we really, until late, I'd say over 3/4 of the way through the series, you don't find much out about Rei. And long story short, you find out that Rei is essentially a clone, DNA wise, of Shinji's mother, and it's insane. It's one of those things where it's a lot to comprehend at one point, and you know, I can understand why people would get confused along the story plots, because from episodes 1 through 12, we're essentially getting introduced to characters like his friends that he's meeting in school. They're tackling angels. Shinji's debating on not even wanting to fight anymore, whether he wants to keep doing it or not, because he's conflicted with the fact that he's been running away from everything. And the fact that he had, Yui, his mother, passed away without knowing how or why she passed away, because he was so young. They're all just conflicted characters, which is what makes the show so interesting, because they're also relatable. They all have these things that they need to confront and battle, but in the end, there's only so much they could do, without facing reality. And like, for instance, you had Misato, and she essentially joined Nerve because of the fact that when she was a kid, her father, Dr. Katsuragi, yes, when he was in Antarctica, and essentially along the lines of that's when the first actual breakout happens, and when that happens, essentially she makes it, and he ends up dying. But you find out that essentially her father was one of those people that pretty much focused on his life's work. It didn't focus on his family. She has, huge trust issues with men, and that's why, long story short, she's with Ryuji before the show even starts. It was like a past relationship, but later down the line, he's more important. He's also had a control of Asuka, and long story short, she has a crush on him. But at the same time, Misato has an ex-relationship, and she takes a lot of her daddy issues, I guess, out onto him, sadly, with the relationship, which she comes to grasp with towards the end of the show, once we find out more that essentially Ryuji has been working undercover the whole time to break out what Nerve's been doing, because essentially the whole time we've been working for the government working for the government to try to stop all the angels, so that once all the angels are destroyed, essentially everybody's getting reincarnated into one single entity for when God strikes down again. Because at this point, they're trying to control the powers that with God has. And the story is so jam-packed. It is so jam-packed, you know. And then you've got Ritsuko, and she is the head scientist of Nerve. Her mother was also the head scientist before she was the head scientist. And what happened with her is that her mother ended up using her brain to power the Magi computer comp. And we find out later on that the whole time that was all happening, that that Gendo, Shinji's dad, was actually screwing her and using her for her knowledge, and found out about Rei and what she is and why she's connected with Lilith and Adam and everything. Because behind this whole story, there's a huge Christian moral background, and that goes without say that it's a good chunk of the story between Christianity and depression and morality and how to move on with life. But so that's happening. Risuko, we find out she was actually screwing, Gendo too. So she felt she was getting used by him towards the end of the show, and she realizes that, and everything starts kind of falling apart. So between that and everything else happening, we get kind of mostly the main characters' backstories dropped and everything. So after that's all said and done, where we left off was after the first couple battles. So now, with that being taken care of, you've got the arc where we find out that Rei is kind of a questionable character, and with her whole backstory, we don't know much about it. Shinji keeps going to her place to help her, clean up her room while she's not there, drop off papers. That's going down. Shinji's, like I said, making friends, so everything's starting to kind of click with him a little bit. At this point in time, he's tried to drop out two times, but he keeps finding motivation. Most of the time, it's from Misato to get back in and help the world, before it's getting destroyed. Especially now at this point that, Misato and Ryuji and everybody else knows what's going on in the background. Even Risuko towards the end knows what essentially Gendo is doing and what is wrong with it trying to be God. Because in the end, Gendo is working for the government, but at the same time, he's not working for them, because his ultimate goal is to get all those clones, essentially, of Rei. Because Rei has many clones powered by Shinji's mother, Yui. And with that all being said and done, the main goal is to tackle all the angels and then get Lilith back together with Rei, so that in the end, everybody's absorbed up into one consciousness, so that Gendo can be reunited with Yui. Huge plot point, huge development. It's so much to grasp into one point. But at this point, towards episode 16, 17 is when everything starts going downhill. Now, in between all that kind of stuff, we've got a couple of smaller but yet important characters. We've got Kawaru, who ends up being another angel. He's a match for the other Evangelion, and he's getting along with Shinji, tells Shinji things, makes him contemplate everything that he knows at this point, and towards the end of it, we find out that somebody has breached the Nerve base, and it turns out to be him. And with that all being there, towards the end, Shinji has his choice, where it's either Kawaru is going to kill him or he has to kill him. And either way, it doesn't matter for him. So he ends up killing him, Shinji does. And that's a big plot point for him. The fact that it's to kill somebody that ended up being so close to him, but not even realizing that he was the enemy the whole time. So he's got even more trust issues. And then, during the school years, Shinji actually has a friend named Toji. And in the very beginning of the story, Toji actually ends up beating up Shinji because the first incident ended up taking his sister to the hospital from injuries. And he's like, Shinji, after getting beat up, is like, it wasn't my choice to fly this thing, And irony has it later on that Choji is actually a match for the third Evangelion system. So there's that plot point. And the whole time, Rei knows, Asuka knows, Misato knows, Ryuji knows, everybody knows but Shinji. And towards the end, his dad actually asked him to shut down System 3 because they did not match whatsoever, even though they were supposed to match, and it went out of control. Shinji's, fighting him, and he doesn't even realize, Toji's been gone a lot from school, but so what? What's the big deal? Come to find out that during this, Shinji is now forced to take Toji out without knowing, and once he finds out that Toji's in there, he doesn't want to do it. So his dad pretty much takes the plug, which is Rei's DNA, X's him out of there, puts it in there, and actually crushes and kills Toji. It was a big plot point, turning point, which Shinji essentially doesn't want to do it anymore. He's getting ready to leave for the third time, and then you have Ryuji, who at this point, like I said earlier, Misato is pretty much the only other person that knows that he's working for another people to find out what's going on. So with that, things are getting kind of wild with everything going on. So we have that, and then on top of that, like I said, everything's going to a shit show, and everything's breaking down. All this is going on. Get to the end of the show, right around around the mid 20s. We get to this point now where, Asukara is in this mental state because she's lost her last couple battles, so she can't handle it because she realizes she's not dependent on herself. Rei realizes her whole purpose, even though she kind of knew her whole purpose the whole time. Shinji's at this point now where he's realized that he hasn't relied on anybody and that he can't rely on anybody. And that leads us to the technical, regular, series ending. And then you've got the theatrical end of the Evangelion ending. With both of those, you've got a few things going on. The regular, original ending, you have essentially the Straight of the Angels. Gendo and Rei are in the back, fusing with Lilith, the whole Lilith and Adam thing. You got that going on. Well, the whole time, essentially, Shinji's consciousness has been absorbed into the Jello. It's like a weird thing, like a Jello thing that is like the consciousness of everybody. And while this is all going on, Shinji's having like a moral dilemma within himself. That, is he going to just stick alone forever, or is he going to realize he needs to help depend on people and not be alone and understand that he has, because that is like the main thing is value, and Shinji does not think he has any value in his life. So that's the main point there. And with that taken home, it ends up working and everything. And you've got the Redux version, instead of everybody dying and everything. And then the other part, that original, was controversial. The last two episodes are pretty much just shots, really chintzy-ish drawings, and a lot of fans didn't like that, but I still enjoyed it for the plot purposes. And there's just so much to take out of this show. If you had a couple episodes that the main focus, the mental thing, who cares? The whole show, one of the most, I guess I want to say, innovative and creative things out there. So if you're worried about the animation, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. But anyways, so I'm at the end of the Evangelion, and that is one of those things where obviously the fan demand back in '97 was to reboot that ending, and so I was more of a not correct, but more, I guess, to the standards of the fans for animation and everything. So in the reboot end of Evangelion, the main difference is that you have Misato essentially it's Shinji down there, and she knows what she has to do in order to be able to hopefully save humanity. So what she ends up doing in that is ends up kissing Shinji and sending him off. But before that, I almost forgot to mention the most controversial part of the movie, the opening scene, where you have Asuka in like a healing at the hospital and Shinji just staring at her, and then he ends up doing his business right next to her. So there's the most controversial scene that everybody references. But anyways, so you got that whole thing happening. Misato kisses Shinji and tells him that once you make it out of this alive, there's more to come. But obviously Misato dies, because in this version you have, I want to say, essentially the world government coming in to shut down Gendo's operation with everything going on, because they're figuring out that he doesn't want to do what they want to do. So they got that whole thing going on. So that's going on. Essentially, Ritsuko confronts Gendo about everything going on, and she knows what's happening. She still ends up dying. Everybody in this ending ends up dying anyways. But the main difference is at the ending is that instead of reflecting everything that's happened in his decisions and then finding his own self-worth, in this ending he has a choice. He ends up essentially sticking alive with Asuka, which is kind of weird because she's still in that whole mental state of not wanting to be there and the world's over, and he's accepted, I guess not necessarily defeat, because in this one it's a little more trippy with Rei and Wolf and everything else going on in the background with the scenery and everything, but essentially he accepts it and himself to depend on others to repopulate the whole world instead of being absorbed by the orange-ish gel of life. So in one ending he accepts who he is as a person and moves on with the rest of the world in the gel. In the other ending, he still somewhat accepts himself, but he's still alive with Asuka to repopulate the whole world. Now, I know I cut a lot of corners, and I know I'm pretty much just general synopsis because I didn't want to spoil too much. There's a lot to cover with 26 episodes and 2 movies. But I'm not even going to cover the 4 other movies that were like the redux of the 2000s to go along with it. But overall, Neon Genesis is like a 9 out of 10. It's got your action, you got your mecha, you have character development, deep psychological things, underlying plots to go along with it. So you got this whole thing going on. I definitely recommend watching it twice though. It's maybe the first time just kind of going through, enjoying it. Second time going through, try to dig up a little bit more. If you need help with a guideline, I definitely recommend watching a guideline with the movie to kind of get everything in line. But other than that, you should be good to go. It's enjoyable. Like I said, if you can watch the original version with the original subs, if you're in English or regular, stream Japanese version, highly recommend it, because you have the classic intro with the Fly Me to the Moon outro, and every episode's ending has a different variation of Fly Me to the Moon to kind of go along with what's going on in the show. It's really awesome how that all works out, which you miss out with the re-release on Blu-ray, which is a shame. But I like to watch it high quality without having to do a bootleg or look into depth about finding that stuff. No. So that is my thorough analysis of Evangelion. I know it's kind of a mess. I've been working on it for a little bit. I just rewatched it recently. I'd say in the last couple of weeks. It's definitely one that sticks with you. I'd say recommend it in the wintertime to anybody. It was the anime of '96 that essentially was the turning point for anime to save it, and it did its job. It just officially ended this year, technically speaking. So that's 10, 20, 25, 26 years later, and it still has a huge fan base. So if you don't want to take my word for it, I say give it a go and tackle it out. So thank you very much. you now got the box set review and pretty much the general synopsis of the whole point, skipping a lot of details, but highly recommend watching it. So thanks for sticking around. This is Squids, and I will see you later.